Hey, I'm Mike, owner of KLN Solar, and today we're back with another episode of SolarProSaturday, where we're going to be taking a deeper dive into how you size a battery system. Let's get started. So today we're going to go over a quick recap. Why would you have batteries with your system? Go over the SolarEdge Energy Bank and Enphase and Charge specs, and then get into some details on how to start sizing these systems. Starting points, rules of thumb, refining the design, and then setting some realistic expectations. So to start with, why would you want backup, or specifically battery backup? We know outages are getting more and more prevalent nationwide. They're lasting longer, they're affecting more people. Storms are getting more intense, the grid is getting overtaxed. More and more essential appliances for people are running on electricity too. I mean, think about all the electric cars. If you can't charge that, you can't go anywhere. Some places don't have good net metering, and you have to take advantage of peak shifting as well, where you're basically providing all of your own energy on peak and then using the grid to a higher extent off peak. And then as cost of items like food goes up, it would be more expensive if you lost power and lost all your food in your refrigerator. And finally, one of the biggest ones we're seeing now is there's a growing distrust of utilities and governments and all of that, and desire to be prepared for any future disasters. A big example of this would be just look at the Texas blackouts of last year. So we've got some options. We've got the SolarEdge Energy Bank. This is a DC coupled battery. That makes it more efficient because the energy is only converted once. You produce the electricity at the solar panel in DC. It goes to the energy hub inverter. If it's going to be used, it's converted and used. If it's going to be stored, it remains in DC, goes into the battery. Then when it comes out of the battery, it gets converted and used. So one conversion total. Also, there's less parts to fail. There's no inverters built into these batteries. They're using the central inverter for the whole system. And finally, this is fairly niche use, but certain areas that have AC system size limits, you can take advantage of DC oversizing. We're doing this a lot in core territory out in Colorado right now. We can take a 10 kilowatt AC rated inverter and put up to 20 kilowatts of solar on it by having the batteries on there to handle any excess. These batteries do come in 10 kilowatt hour storage increments. Each battery can produce 7,500 watts peak and 5,000 sustained. That's one of the highest out there right now. The caveat here is that each energy hub inverter, 7,600 and up, there is a 3,800 out there. I don't see much of a use case for that. But each inverter 7,600 and up maxes out at 15,000 watts or 15 kilowatts peak and 10,000 or 10 kilowatts sustained output. Higher than that, you just need to use multiple inverters. Each of these inverters, by the way, can take up to 3 batteries. So you can have up to 30 kilowatt hours, but you're really only getting the power output from 2 batteries. So that third one is adding energy storage capacity, but it's not adding power to the system. Panels here, when they're tied to the energy hub with the batteries, those panels charge the battery, as well as powering the home. Panels that are tied to additional energy hubs that don't have batteries, so for example, you had a 20K system with 2 7,600 energy hubs, but 1 battery, the panels tied to the energy hub with the battery can contribute to the battery. The ones to the other energy hub do remain online, even without the battery. They're still providing energy for the home, but they cannot directly contribute to the battery charge. The Enphase N-Charge has been around for a little bit longer. It's a different technology. These are AC coupled, meaning that they have their own inverters built in. And in true Enphase fashion, they are microinverters. So you can see them right here in this picture. Advantage of an AC coupled system is that it's easier to retrofit to an existing system. You don't need a battery ready inverter. So these could go on any IQ7 or 8 system, be retrofit fairly easily. Problem here though is the energy has to be converted 3 times. It's converted immediately at the panel or at the microinverter at the panel. It's converted again back to DC when it hits the battery. And then when it's used, it has to be converted again. 3 conversions means more energy loss. On the plus side, it is a lithium iron phosphate chemistry. It's a fairly small difference, but it's a little bit more stable. It's a little bit more bulky, which is why this looks bigger. They do last a little bit longer. And they do come in 3.36 kilowatt hour increments. Most commonly, we sell the N-Charge 10, which you see here without its case on, which is just 3 of the 3.36 kilowatt hour units. I don't see much use for anything smaller than a 10. So for the sake of the rest of this video, we're going to be comparing 10s versus 10s. So with the Encharge, a 10 kilowatt hour battery can produce 5,000 watts peak and 3,800 watts sustain. That's probably its biggest weak point right now, is it has a relatively low power output. When it's paired with the IQ8 series, specifically microinverters, all of the panels remain online, and all of them can contribute to the battery at all times. If it is the IQ7s tied to it, there is a limit of how many of the panels or how many of the microinverters will remain online in an outage, and the rest of them are shed. There is no limit to battery sizing here beyond the limitations of capability to provide the energy. So your solar system size, which we'll discuss in a little bit. So real quick overview, easy table, comparing, again, especially the 10s. They're effectively the same in energy content, but the SolarEdge is about 25 or 50% larger in terms of peak and a little less than 50% larger in terms of sustained power output. And then this is the current for each of them. So you can see you're going to have a little more flexibility to power larger appliances with the SolarEdge battery. When we get into some sizing considerations, you have to consider basically two factors. You have your power output, and then you have your energy capacity. So some of the important starting points you want to ask, what are you trying to back up? That's number one. Is this going to be a whole home backup, a partial home backup? Partial home, how much of the home? Whole home, what appliances do you need? It's going to be very different doing a house down here in South Florida that has 3 air conditioners and all of the appliances are electric, and they have 2 electric vehicles and a pool, and they want everything backed up, compared to a home in Pennsylvania or New Jersey where a lot of the major appliances are gas, and it's a smaller home with a lot less AC requirements and whatnot. So you really need to get down to the appliance level. Also, what is the realistic desired duration of the backup? Do they want backup for a day, for 3 days? These batteries will recharge themselves when the sun comes back out, as long as you have a large enough solar system and you get good enough light output. But you have to think about what typically causes the outages. Here in Florida, it's typically storms. Do those storms blow away quickly and you get back to sunlight the next day? Or do you have 2 or 3 days of storms and 2 or 3 days of bad production? So you really have to look at that. That would be compared to, let's say, a rolling blackout out west where they're just worried about wind, but it's still sunny. They're going to have a much easier time recharging their batteries. We also need to look at the power. So my general rule of thumb that I start with is if you're doing a critical load backup, it's a 10 or more, right? All you're going to get out of a 10 kilowatt hour battery is critical load. So nothing 220 volt, low draw 110s only. So this will power the refrigerator, which is almost everybody's #1 priority. It'll power some lights, preferably LED, some outlets. They'll get Wi-Fi, TV, maybe a portable 110 volt AC unit in a single enclosed room. They want comfortable conditions to sleep in at night, maybe. Preferably you run this during the day when it's light out. That way you're not just solely relying on the battery. So we go up to a 20 kilowatt hour battery. Now we can potentially run some small 220s, 220 volt appliances. You really want to look at the breaker size, the startup and steady demands, compare that to the battery specs of who you're using. You're going to also have the ability to do more low draw 110 volt breakers, maybe adding some computers in here. And then, the biggest difference here going to the 20 is you've got twice as much energy stored. So in the absence of production, you're going to be able to sustain a battery backup for a little bit longer. Now, if we want to start running some large appliances, we're at either a SolarEdge 20 or an Enphase 30. I want to put a little asterisk there because this really does vary. So single air conditioning unit, a well pump, something like that is what I consider a large appliance. The Enphase 20 may be able to start some smaller ACs, 3 tons or less, preferably newer, preferably a higher SEER rating, may be able to do a smaller well pump. Soft start capacitors are huge here. They help to reduce the starting demand. So you really have to look on an individual level. And once again, you get more 110s that you can back up and just a longer duration because you've got more energy stored. So just to summarize my rule of thumb, I basically look to start at number of major appliances +1 for SolarEdge and +2 for Enphase. So No major appliances is a critical load. That's going to be one battery. One major appliance is going to be 2 SolarEdge or 3 Enphase. 2 is going to be 3 SolarEdge, 4 Enphase, and so on. Always, always, always manually verify this. You want to look at the breaker size. You want to look at equipment specs. You might even want to run your own ammeter on there. But always verify, because there's always going to be outliers. Some large, old, less efficient appliances might require more batteries. At the same time, smaller, newer, more efficient appliances might not require as many. And then always size for the worst case scenario. Overnight, bad storm, no sunlight, where you're relying entirely on the battery. That's what you want to use to size, because anything else is going to just work even better. Now we also need to consider the energy. So this is a little less precise, a lot more estimating here. You really want to look at the average daily consumption specifically for what you're backing up. If you're only backing up 4 or 5 breakers, there's no reason to look at the consumption of the whole home. Estimate the amount of time the battery would be required to support this without any solar output. And again, give yourself a larger margin of error. It's better to end the dark period or end the outage with some residual charge left than to be depleted in the middle of the night and just lose power. That would defeat the entire purpose. And again, what is the duration of the outage typical for the area? What are the weather considerations? Are we preparing for hurricanes in Florida, where we might have a day, 2 days, 3 days of bad weather, and then up to a month of power outage? Or are they going to be something like in California, the government blackouts during fire season, where again, it's still sunny, you're still producing. There's not really a storm in the area. And then what time of year do the outages typically occur? Again, if it's in Florida in hurricane season, if we're talking electric usage in August versus electric usage in February, that's going to be entirely different. Last one you want to consider is some energy production. So in theory, on paper, any size battery could be paired to a system and provide backup capabilities in a grid outage, as long as you don't exceed the connection limit. So we talked about that already with SolarEdge. That's 3 batteries per energy hub. On really small solar systems, this could require you to be in backup only mode, because the system's just not large enough to recharge that battery. You would basically have it charged up over a period of a couple of days, hold its energy, and use it when you need it. That's not the norm. That's not what we recommend. So typically you want to ensure that the solar is capable of providing the energy needed for the daytime operations and recharging of the battery at the same time. So that way the battery is ready for nighttime operations. Of those backed up loads specifically, again, we're not necessarily talking about the whole home here. Remember to factor in weather considerations. If the weather's not good, if the sun conditions are not good, you're producing less than normal. So you're recharging slower than normal. You might even need the battery from time to time during the daytime. So oversized systems typically will charge the batteries faster. And more importantly, in inclement conditions, they're more likely going to be able to contribute to the battery. So that's our rule of thumb. That's where we start. Now we need to refine. So how much power or energy do you really need? Most major appliance data sheets will indicate their power draw, their startup surges, and their sustained requirements. This is especially important on anything with a motor or a compressor. These are the ones that have the big start surges, especially if it is a 220 volt appliance. Thinking about you air conditioners and well pumps especially. So what we're looking at and what we're concerned about is the amps. And the amps is the power divided by the voltage. So if you have something with a higher voltage like a 220, that requires even more power to generate the same amount of current. Another major concern that we have from time to time, getting more common, especially as we're starting to do some of these systems for people doing things like mining Bitcoins and working from home with some pretty intense computer systems, is you need to factor in the amount of usage and of the power supply, as well as the duration. So when we're looking at energy, that is the power times the duration. So whatever the amount of power that computer is taking based on how they're using it, times the duration it needs to run off grid, you need at least that much energy plus the rest of whatever you're backing up. So when you look at a data card, this is an air conditioner, you'll very often see the minimum circuit amps, minimum breaker size. They'll word it differently. That is a good place to start. So this air conditioner, I can almost guarantee you, is running on a 40 or even a 50 amp breaker. And actually it's saying the max up here is a 50. So 40 or 50 is what it's going to be connected to. That's just so it doesn't trip. but the minimum that it needs to be able to operate is 35.7. So you need to factor that in against what is the power output potential of whatever battery that you're looking at, whatever size you're looking at, whatever brand. Even better, take an actual ammeter and determine the actual starting surge and the actual steady draw. This becomes really important when we start doing things like soft start capacitors, which is something I have on this air conditioner. That helps to decrease that starting surge, make a more stable microgrid, make it easier to sustain the backup. And again, always provide a margin of error, err on the side of larger, not smaller. So you really need to think about what's the worst case scenario. What could start simultaneously? What could be running simultaneously? Anything that's backed up, you basically need to think that it's going to be able to, it's going to be the worst case scenario where they're both two major appliances are going to kick on at exactly the same time. And you need to be able to handle that. So is the AC starting at the same time as a second AC? Is the AC starting at the same time as a well pump? Whatever it may be. Even if you have a slight momentary deficit where your demand exceeds your capable output, your system will become unstable and crash. Yes, it will restart, but that's not good for your appliances are plugged into. It's not good for the battery. And your customer is not going to be too happy when every time the AC tries to kick on, his entire house crashes. So is there a better solution? There is. I'm starting to like putting smart meters on these systems. We've got spans, which I like to use when we're doing a main panel upgrade anyways. That is a complete smart panel, not smart meter. I don't know why I put that. It's a smart panel replacement. Lumen is very similar functionality wise, but Lumen will actually retrofit into an existing panel and make it into a smart panel. So I'll use those on newer houses that already have 200 amp panels. The thing I like about this is it gives you a dynamic backup priority list. So you set your priorities. What is most important that you have backed up? What is energized? Is going to be controlled in real time based on the battery output, the solar production, the state of charge. So if you have two batteries, but your solar is cranking out electricity, it's going to allow more circuits to be kept online. You get to nighttime, you get to a storm condition, something like that, it's going to automatically taper that down. So that way you're not exceeding how much power you can produce. And also that you're not blowing through your battery capacity really quick. Advantage here is it's no longer limited to a pre-selected breaker. You're not just doing a sub panel and saying, hey, pick 6 circuits that you want backed up. You could, in theory, have the entire house backed up doing it this way and just have that priority list. And if you've got a large enough solar system, maybe you can run the whole house during the day and only certain things at night. These are, mark my words, these are the future. And we're starting to put them in a little more and more exciting stuff and expect this to become more common. So once again, we're getting a little more in depth here. If you made it this far, awesome job. We'll have even more in depth coming out soon. Any questions, feel free to reach out there. Always happy to have people join my team. And any ideas for future trainings, drop them in the comments below.